Karen turned my apple orchard into a pay-per-visit buffet for just $20. But no one knew that behind this cheap price was a sophisticated scam, and an unexpected battle was waiting to explode. Welcome to Karen Karma channel. Do you own any fruit orchards? Leave a comment below. One fresh morning, the gentle sunlight filtered through the apple tree canopy, casting a warm golden layer over my vast orchard. The red apples, like sparkling gems, hung heavily on the branches, filling the air with their sweet, refreshing fragrance. The morning dew still lingered in the air, creating a beautiful scene, but this peaceful atmosphere was broken by an uncomfortable noise. Right in the middle of the orchard, Karen had set up a shabby ticket booth made of old wooden planks. Next to the booth was a rough wooden sign, hastily written with the words, Apple Buffet only $20 slash per visit. She stood there, counting a thick stack of bills, with a wide grin on her face. Karen seemed to be savoring her success, her eyes gleaming with self-satisfaction as she watched each person line up with interest. The people around, excited and eager, handed over their money and moved toward the booth. She clapped her hands loudly, grabbing the attention of the crowd. Hey, hey, for just $20, you can eat as many apples as you want. Pick as many as you like. Eat here or take them with you. No one will check. Karen's voice rang out like an irresistible invitation. She held up a fresh red apple, biting into it with force. The crisp crunch of the apple echoed through the air, making everyone even more excited. These are apples from my orchard, 100% clean, no chemicals, and way tastier than supermarket apples. Hurry up, today's the last day. A crowd began to push and shove, families happily bringing their children, groups of young people laughing and chatting. Everyone quickly pulled out their wallets and handed their money to Karen. She saw this and became even more delighted, eagerly taking money from each person, even throwing out a few enthusiastic greetings. Beside her, an employee Karen had hired stood checking tickets, nodding and counting each person in like a machine. This person smiled and greeted each new guest as if this were a special event they couldn't miss. I stood there, my gaze cold but my heart surging with terror. The scene before me made it hard to believe what I was seeing. My apple orchard, the place I had spent so many seasons caring for, had now become a cheap show. Karen, someone I once trusted, was now exploiting every apple from my orchard, turning it into nothing more than a money-making trick. The sweet scent of the apples, once my pride, now tasted bitter, as if each apple was accusing me of the injustice I had to endure. The laughter and advertising slogans from Karen felt like a knife stabbing at my heart. I quickly walked toward the ticket booth, anger bubbling up inside me. One step, two steps, then I yanked the Apple Buffet sign down, making it crash to the ground with a loud clunk. The noise rang out like an alarm bell, and the crowd suddenly fell silent, all their eyes now on me. The air became heavy and tense. Karen immediately turned around, her face clearly showing anger, her arms crossed in front of her chest. She stepped toward me, her face twisted with challenge. Hey, what do you think you're doing? This is my sign, my orchard. You have no right to touch it. Her voice rang out angrily, as if she couldn't accept this challenge. I didn't step back, standing firm, my arms crossed in front of my chest, my cold gaze sweeping over Karen. Your orchard. Then tell me, who owns the land here? I raised an eyebrow, not missing any of her movements. Karen froze, the confidence in her eyes suddenly vanishing. She gritted her teeth, trying to maintain her smug appearance, but her tone remained unchanged. Oh, please. This land has been abandoned for so long. I've rehabilitated it, taken care of the plants, and now it's mine. As for you, don't you dare argue. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with anger, deliberately dismissing the truth I had just challenged. I took another step closer, staring straight into Karen's eyes. My voice had now lowered, as if about to declare war. Do you have a land lease contract? Do you have ownership documents? Can you prove you have the right to own this place? Each word, each sentence of mine was like a sharp strike to her reasoning, causing Karen to start feeling uneasy. She swallowed, looking confused but still trying to keep her arrogant attitude. Karen lifted her chin, still trying to force a smirk, but her smile no longer had the confidence it once did. If you want an apple, just pay $20 and come in. I don't like to argue. Her voice couldn't hide her frustration, and she deliberately changed the subject to avoid answering my question. But I was all too familiar with these tactics. I stood there, saying nothing more, just staring at Karen, my eyes like burning fire. The people around us began to whisper, some murmuring, others looking at me with concern. The whole atmosphere seemed to freeze, with only the sound of Karen counting money, which I could no longer bear. Karen turned her back, continuing her task of counting money, treating me like an invisible shadow, but I could no longer remain silent. All the pretenses she had built up were being shattered, and I would not allow her to continue deceiving the people around her. I stood firm, feeling the tension closing in around me. While Karen was still absorbed in counting money, I took a shiny metal card from my jacket pocket and held it up in front of her. The card reflected light like a warning, making the atmosphere even heavier than before. The card read, United States Senator. Karen immediately froze, her eyes wide with confusion, her mouth moving as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Her whole body seemed frozen in place, unable to move. The people around us began to whisper, each sentence like a wave of confusion rising, making the tension in the air even more palpable. What? Is he a senator? My God, she's done for. No way. How could this happen? But instead of backing down, Karen suddenly burst out laughing. It wasn't a panicked laugh, but a mocking one, as if she didn't believe what was happening. She lifted her chin, sneered, and her haughty eyes showed no fear of the truth being revealed. Ah, a senator. What's so new about that? Do you think this card scares me? Karen's voice rang out, full of challenge and mockery, as if she didn't believe a word of what I had just said. Go ahead. I don't believe it at all. The people around, seeing this, began looking at each other, their anxiety growing. But Karen didn't notice, continuing to stand with her arms crossed, her face tilted up with pride. A few people quietly tried to warn her. Mrs. Maris, don't be so stubborn. He really is a senator. That's right. Be careful. This is not something you can mess with. But Karen paid no attention to their warnings. She just kept laughing, seemingly growing more and more arrogant. I'm not scared. What's wrong with what I'm doing? I'm just selling apples. She shot me a glare, swatting my card to the ground, challenging me as though I were incapable of doing anything to her. I was not at all swayed by her attitude. I took another step closer, my gaze as cold as ice, not allowing her to escape responsibility. My voice lowered, sharp and authoritative. I am the legal owner of this garden, and now you are not only charged with trespassing, but also illegal business activities, deceiving the public. And I bent down, picking up my card. I continued, not giving her any chance to justify herself. Most likely tax evasion. As soon as I finished speaking, the atmosphere around us seemed to freeze with tension. Suddenly, a loud car horn blared, making everyone jump and turn around. The horn didn't just sound once, but kept blaring, echoing throughout the quiet apple orchard, like a warning signal. A sleek black SUV with flashing blue and red lights sped through the orchard gate, skidding and stopping with a screech right in front of us. The sound of the tires screeching seemed to tear through the air. The crowd stepped back, their eyes wide with surprise, many of them whispering. This scene was so unexpected. No one had thought that the FBI would show up on a normal morning. Two FBI agents stepped out of the car, dressed in black suits, sunglasses covering their eyes. creating an image of power and authority. One agent swiftly pulled handcuffs from his belt, moving with practiced ease, while the other held a thick stack of investigative documents, staring directly at Karen without ever looking away. The entire orchard seemed to stop breathing, all eyes focused on Karen. The first agent approached, his voice deep and commanding, delivering the words, "Mrs. Maris, you are under arrest for trespassing, illegal business operations, tax evasion, and fraud." Karen froze, her eyes wide with panic, her hands trembling as if she had no strength left. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. In an instant, fear consumed her. The orchard now fell silent, with only the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Karen threw the stack of money onto the ground, coins scattering everywhere, and pieces of paper flying around like flower petals blown by the wind. She stepped back, her eyes wide with terror, her voice stammering uncontrollably. "No, this can't be. This is a misunderstanding. I was just making a little money. Just a small job. There's nothing wrong with that." Karen hurriedly stepped back, waving her arms as if to dismiss the truth that was unfolding before her. She didn't want to believe what was happening. But the second agent stepped forward, flipping through the stack of documents in his hand, his voice cold and emotionless. "We've been monitoring you for a long time. The invoices from your Apple buffet have totaled over $200,000, but there's been no tax declaration. Do you think you can escape this?" The words hit Karen like another shock. She couldn't speak, standing there, unable to justify her actions. But instead of backing down, Karen still refused to relent. She quickly said, "But I was just helping people get clean apples. This can't be happening." In that moment, I stepped forward, not in a hurry, but with every step filled with power. I took a piece of official paperwork with a red seal from my jacket pocket, exposing everything. I held it up in front of Karen and the crowd. "Here, this is the ownership document for this land. I am the legal owner of this apple orchard. All your activities have been without my consent, and now you must take responsibility." Karen stared at the document, her face turning from red to white, then pale. She stepped back another step, as if trying to escape reality. All her excuses were now meaningless. The crowd around us fell silent, with only a deep sigh of regret in the air. The agent stepped forward without hesitation and handcuffed Karen right there. The crowd around us began to clap, the sound exploding in the air, some people cheering, others already starting to record videos. The sight of Karen being arrested in the middle of the orchard, under the sunlight, felt like the execution of justice. She still struggled, but it was all too late. "Don't, don't arrest me," Karen screamed, but no one paid attention to her pleas anymore. After a month of investigation, today, the trial of Karen was finally taking place. In the silent atmosphere of the courtroom, the bright light shone on Karen's tense face as she sat quietly, her hands still trembling, gripping the armrest tightly. The accusations from the prosecutor still echoed in her head, but now there was no escaping. The evidence, the testimonies, everything was against her. The judge, with a stern expression, looked down at the file full of evidence, holding a wooden gavel in his hand, and struck the desk forcefully, shattering the silence in the room. Everyone in the courtroom watched intently at his every move. "Defendant Maris Whitmore, the court sentences you to 10 years in prison, along with a fine of $500,000 for business fraud and tax evasion." The judge's words were like a thunderclap, causing Karen to fall forward. Her whole body staggered, her face turned pale, and cold sweat dripped down her forehead. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Karen screamed in utter despair, her voice breaking. "No, no way. I can't go to prison for that long. I was just selling apples." Karen collapsed onto the table, both hands covering her face, tears starting to flow uncontrollably. She sobbed loudly, her mouth stuttering, unable to speak, pleading with the judge, pleading with everyone in the room. Please, I was just making a little money. I never intended to deceive anyone. Please, don't send me to prison. Karen's cries echoed throughout the room, but no one was moved. The people in the courtroom began whispering. Comments of little mercy started to rise. One person sitting near me looked directly at Karen, shook their head, and said, "No one forced her to open the apple buffet. Greed always leads to downfall." Another person added, "That's right. She thought she could get away with it without being caught. Now she has to face the consequences." The room began to buzz with chatter, and the looks toward Karen were now full of disdain and judgment. The judge, seeing this scene, furrowed his brow for a moment before continuing. "Defendant Maris Whitmore, the court has made a just decision. Your actions have caused significant harm to the community, and you must take responsibility." Karen continued to sob, but no one came to comfort her. The crowd in the courtroom grew increasingly impatient. She had played with fire, and now she had to face the consequences. The feeling of justice being served filled the room, and no one felt pity for Karen anymore. She was left with nothing but despair, awaiting her sentence. 6 months later, on a peaceful morning, I walked into my apple orchard, the place that had once been the center of disputes, clashes, and illegal schemes. Now, the atmosphere was calm and fresh, as if reborn after the storm. Warm rays of sunlight gently shone down, caressing the apple branches weighed down with fruit. Gone were the cheap, colorful billboards. Gone were the tourists pushing and shoving, no longer standing in line like soulless sheep, waiting for the opportunity to pick free apples. Each of my steps echoed in the silence, feeling as if I had returned to the peaceful days before, when I was the owner of this orchard, not part of a scam, but part of nature. I took a deep breath, the sweet scent of apples filling the air, and suddenly, my heart felt remarkably lighter. I stopped under a large apple tree, where the ripe apples were waiting to be picked. My arm reached up, gently touching a bright red apple, beautiful like a gem. The feeling of it in my hand was amazing, fresh, sweet, the result of all the effort and love I had poured into this orchard. I smiled, gently turning the apple in my hand, admiring its color. A part of me felt as though I had just touched a symbol of restoration. Finally, justice has been served, I whispered to myself, a sense of peace rising in my heart. I still vividly remember the stressful days when Karen stood there with her smug smile and deceitful words, tricking the people. Now, it was all over. My orchard, after everything, had finally returned to being truly mine, and no one could exploit it anymore. I bent down, bringing the apple to my mouth, closing my eyes to savor its fresh flavor. Each crisp bite seemed to wash away all the fatigue and worries I had gone through. Justice had prevailed, and this orchard was now a place of peace, where I could enjoy the true fruits of my labor. In the absolute silence of the orchard, I felt the peace that I had lost during the past months. This orchard, now, was mine.